In every corporate tower, behind the polished glass and the marble floors, there's a secret game always being played. Rules don't matter. Performance doesn't matter. What matters is who you know, who you're related to, and who's pulling the strings. This was the reality Karen faced. A compliance officer with nearly a decade of spotless service. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but she was respected. And feared. Not because she shouted, not because she bullied, but because when Karen spoke, she had evidence, she had facts, she had the quiet power that came from knowing the rules better than anyone else in the room. Her presence was steady. Her reports, precise. Her record, untouchable, but all of that changed the day a new name appeared on the roster. Not a veteran, not an expert, not even someone who had earned their place. It was the CEO's nephew, Travis. He arrived like a storm that no one had asked, for, from the moment he walked into the building, he carried himself like it already belonged to him. He wore arrogance like a uniform. He smirked through meetings. He interrupted senior managers mid-sentence, and worst of all, he ignored every single policy Karen had spent years defending. At first, she gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was just inexperienced. Maybe he would learn, but Travis didn't want to learn. He wanted control. His new position wasn't about work. It wasn't about skill. It was about power. Handed to him like a family heirloom, and with that power came chaos. He skipped approval chains. He signed off on budgets he didn't understand. He approved contractors with zero vetting, and every time Karen flagged an issue, Travis brushed her off like she was a nuisance. "Don't worry about it," he'd say with a smirk, or worse. "Do you know who my uncle is?" Those words were his shield, his excuse, his weapon. But Karen knew something. Travis didn't. Compliance wasn't just a checklist. It wasn't just paperwork. It was the backbone of the entire company. The thing investors, regulators, and the board depended on to keep the business safe. And if Travis wanted to play games with it, then Karen would turn those very rules into the trap that would end him. Because while he was flaunting his connections, she was documenting every misstep, every violation, every reckless decision, page by page. Line by line, she was building something he would never see coming, and soon, his arrogance would collide with Karen's patience. That's when the real war began. Travis's rise was fast, too fast. Within weeks, he was sitting in meetings where strategy was discussed, budgets were approved, and compliance was supposed to be the guiding hand, but compliance meant nothing to him. He treated rules like speed bumps, meant to be ignored. And every time Karen tried to remind him, he laughed. "Karen, relax," he'd say, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. "Do you really think the board cares about your little checklists? We're here to make deals, not babysit paperwork." Paperwork, that's what he called the systems that kept the company alive. But Karen knew better, and so did everyone else who had worked there long enough to remember the last compliance scandal, the fines, the lawsuits, the media firestorm that nearly sank them. Karen had survived that storm. She had helped rebuild the systems that kept the business afloat, and she wasn't about to let some entitled nephew tear it all down. Still, Travis was relentless. He began bypassing her completely, approving vendors without reviews, signing contracts without legal oversight, handing out jobs to friends, cousins, anyone who owed him a favor. The office began to change. Morale dropped. Good employees grew bitter, watching unqualified hires rise above them. Meetings grew tense. People whispered in hallways, careful not to speak too loudly, because everyone knew Travis had protection. Every mistake he made, every reckless move, was shielded by the fact that the CEO was his uncle, and who was going to challenge that? Who would risk their career to stand against him? The answer was Karen, but not yet, not openly. Instead, she watched, she documented, and most importantly, she waited, because compliance wasn't about noise, it was about timing. And soon, Travis would hand her the weapon she needed, the Breaking point came on a Tuesday. Morning, the quarterly audit was looming, the moment when every department had to account for its work. Audits weren't optional, they weren't flexible. They were the one time the company couldn't hide behind titles or family connections. Karen sent her usual reminders, clear and direct. All documentation must be submitted by Friday. Non-compliance will be reported. Most departments scrambled, pulling files, double-checking numbers. But Travis, he rolled his eyes. Karen, do you really think I have time for this? I'm meeting investors. I'm closing deals. Nobody cares about some binder full of reports. Nobody cares. Those words burned into Karen's mind because someone did care. The auditors, the regulators, the board, and Travis had just made his first fatal mistake. Karen didn't argue, she didn't push. Instead, she made a note. One more violation, one more page in the file she was building. By Friday, every department had submitted their documentation, except one, Travis's. The day of the audit, the room was filled with tension, binders stacked high on the conference table, the auditors flipping through page after page, executives shifting nervously in their seats, and then came the question. Where are the compliance reports for Travis's division? The room went silent. Heads turned. Eyes landed on Travis. And for the first time, his smirk faltered. He tried to bluff, tried to laugh it off. Reports? Oh, I didn't think those were necessary for what we're doing. You know how fast-paced my division is. But the auditors didn't laugh. The board didn't smile. And Karen? Karen sat quietly, her notes in hand, ready for the storm that was about to erupt. Because this was just the beginning. The silence in that boardroom was deafening, every eye locked on Travis. Every second that passed dug the hole deeper. Auditors didn't tolerate excuses. They thrived on precision, on proof, on documented accountability. And Travis? He had nothing. He leaned back in his chair, forcing out a laugh. Look, let's not make a big deal out of this. My team is focused on growth, not paperwork. If we spent all our time filling out forms, we'd never close a deal. But his words only made it worse, because compliance wasn't optional. It wasn't a suggestion. It was law. The auditors exchanged looks. One of them scribbled something into their notes, and that's when Karen spoke. Calm, steady, every syllable deliberate. Travis was reminded 3 separate times of the reporting deadlines. I sent formal notices on March 3rd, March 10th, and again on March 14th, all ignored. These reminders are logged in our compliance system. Copies are available if required. The room shifted. Executives leaned forward. Auditors nodded. Karen wasn't attacking. She wasn't accusing. She was simply stating facts, and facts were lethal. Travis turned red. His jaw clenched as he snapped back. Are you seriously trying to undermine me in front of the board? You think your little memos mean anything? I'm running real operations here, not filing cabinets. But the damage was already done. Because Karen's calm delivery had exposed the truth. Travis wasn't just careless. He was reckless. And the board had noticed. The audit continued. But the atmosphere had changed. What should have been a routine review was now a spotlight trained directly on Travis's failures. By the end of the meeting, the auditors issued a warning. Non-compliance at this scale will require escalation. Continued negligence could result in regulatory penalties. Regulatory penalties. Those words hung in the air like a death sentence. Travis stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. But Karen didn't move. She sat quietly, gathering her papers, knowing the real battle was only beginning. Because men like Travis didn't back down. They lashed out. They retaliated. And within days, he proved her right. Karen received an email, short and cold. Your role is being restructured. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your current compliance duties. Report to HR for reassignment. Reassignment day. Corporate death sentence. They weren't firing her, yet. But they were stripping her power. It was Travis's attempt to silence her, to bury her under bureaucracy, to make her irrelevant. Most people would have panicked. Most would have packed their desk, called a lawyer, maybe even quit. But not Karen. Because while Travis thought he was winning, She was already 3 steps ahead. She didn't just have emails, she didn't just have reminders. She had a dossier, a thick, damning record of every rule Travis had broken, every regulation he had ignored, every law he had danced dangerously close to shattering, and now, with her official duties stripped away, she had nothing to lose. Karen made a choice. A quiet, calculated choice. If Travis wanted war, she would give him one, and the next strike would not come from inside the company. Karen knew the walls inside the company were rigged against her. Travis had the CEOs. Protection, HR was already bending to his will, and every complaint filed internally would end up buried in some drawer, never to see daylight. So Karen didn't waste her time fighting shadows. She took her fight outside. With her dossier in hand, she reached out quietly, not to gossip, not to vent, but to the one group Travis couldn't charm, silence, or threaten, the regulators. It started with a simple, carefully worded letter. She outlined the missed deadlines, the ignored warnings, the contracts signed without approval. She didn't exaggerate, she didn't dramatize, she didn't have to. The facts spoke for themselves. Attached were emails, logs, time-stamped, reminders, a paper trail so airtight it was impossible to dismiss. And when regulators receive a package like that, they don't wait, they act. Within 2 weeks, the company received a notice. Compliance investigation initiated. Immediate cooperation required. Panic swept the executive floor. Suddenly, Travis's charm wasn't enough. Suddenly, his uncle's name wasn't protection, because regulators don't care about family ties. They care about fines, they care about accountability, they care about laws. Meetings grew tense. Directors whispered behind closed doors. And for the first time, Travis was on defense. He stormed into Karen's office, his voice shaking with rage. "You did this. Don't think I don't know. You think you're clever, but you just painted a target on your back." Karen didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him and said, "I followed the rules." "You didn't," and that was it. No shouting, no theatrics, just truth. But truth was Travis's kryptonite, because as regulators began digging deeper, more cracks appeared. Vendors with no records, invoices with missing signatures, approvals that violated procurement laws. Each discovery was another nail in his coffin. Board couldn't ignore it anymore. Investors began asking questions, and whispers of negligence turned into headlines. In the local business press, Travis's name, once a symbol of privilege, was now tied to words like investigation, violations, and non-compliance. But still, he wasn't finished. Cornered animals don't surrender. They lash out, and Travis had one card left to play, a desperate, reckless card. One that would drag Karen into the spotlight in front of the very people she had hoped to protect. And when he played it, the battle would become personal. Travis was cornered. The regulators were circling. The board was restless, and his charm had evaporated like mist under a spotlight. But Travis wasn't the type to accept defeat. He wasn't the type to admit weakness. No, he was the type who would rather drag everyone else down with him than face the truth. So he struck back. At the next executive meeting, with directors, auditors, and the CEO himself present, Travis pointed his finger straight at Karen. "She's the problem," he spat. "She's been undermining this company for months, feeding lies to regulators, leaking documents. She's sabotaging us from the inside." The room gasped. Even seasoned executives froze at the accusation. Sabotage, a word designed to destroy reputations. Karen sat still, calm, her dossier resting in her lap like a weapon, waiting to be unsheathed. Travis leaned forward, pounding the table. If anyone should be investigated, it's her. She's the reason regulators are here. She's the reason investors are nervous. She's been staging this whole thing. For a moment, it seemed his theatrics might work. The CEO looked uneasy. Some directors whispered, and Travis smirked, sensing weakness. But Karen had been preparing for this moment. She stood slowly, her voice steady, her eyes locked on the board. "I welcome an investigation. In fact, I insist on it, because unlike Travis, I keep records." And then, she opened her dossier. Page after page, email after email. Time-stamped reminders, ignored warnings, unauthorized approvals, violation after violation, stacked like bricks in a wall closing in on Travis. The room fell silent. Directors leaned forward, reading for themselves. Auditors nodded grimly. Karen didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply presented. And the facts were undeniable. Travis tried to interrupt. This is out of context. But the chairman cut him off. Enough. One word. Cold. Final. Travis sank back into his chair, his face pale, his confidence cracking for the first time. The CEO shifted uncomfortably, realizing that protecting his nephew now meant risking his own credibility. And the rest of the board? They had seen enough. The chairman turned to Karen. "Leave these with us. We'll review them in full." Karen placed the dossier on the table and walked out without another word. For Travis, the walls were caving in. For Karen, the victory was close. But the war wasn't over. Because exposing him inside the boardroom was one thing. Watching the regulators deliver the final blow was another. And when that blow landed, Travis's career wouldn't just end. It would implode. Weeks passed, but for Travis, they felt like years. The regulators moved fast. They weren't interested in excuses. They weren't swayed by family names. They were interested in facts, and Karen had given them plenty. They combed through every deal Travis had, touched every vendor, every invoice, every skipped review. The results were devastating, unauthorized. Contracts, procurement violations, missing documentation that put the company at risk of millions in fines. It wasn't just negligence. It was systemic abuse. The final report landed on the boardroom table with a weight that felt like judgment itself. Severe compliance failures, gross negligence, immediate corrective action required. The board had no choice. Investors were furious. The company's stock had already dipped from whispers of scandal. And now, the evidence was public. Travis was summoned, but this time, he didn't walk in with a smirk. He didn't lean back in his chair. He looked smaller, defeated. The chairman's voice was cold. "Effective immediately. Your employment is terminated. Security will escort you from the premises." Just like that, it was over. The CEO tried to protest, but even he knew the truth. Protecting Travis any longer meant risking the entire company. And no uncle, no matter how powerful, could justify that. Karen sat in the back of the room, silent, watching the scene unfold. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Because true revenge isn't loud. It's quiet, precise, complete. As Travis was led out of the building, eyes followed him. Whispers trailed behind like shadows. The once arrogant nephew, reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. Karen returned to her office, her position reinstated, her authority stronger than ever. But it wasn't about titles anymore. It wasn't about recognition. It was about proof that integrity can outlast arrogance, that patience can dismantle privilege, that compliance, when wielded with precision, can become the sharpest weapon of all in the end. Karen didn't just outsmart her boss's nepotism. She destroyed it, with nothing but the truth. He learned the hardest lesson of all. You can cheat the system until the system cheats you back.